Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you to the latest edition of Grenzebach Gleer and Associates Thought Leadership Series. Today, we welcome advancement professionals, heads of school, trustees, and others affiliated with schools in 25 different states and 4 different countries. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Liz Farr, and I am your host for today's webinar. After a 27-year career in independent schools, I joined GG&A in 2017. Today, I serve as a senior vice president, and I'm honored to lead the firm's independent schools practice, in which my colleagues and I serve approximately 27 independent schools annually. The genesis for today's webinar, titled Trends to Watch in Independent Schools, was my review a few months ago of the Philanthropy Outlook chapter in the National Association of Independent Schools 2021-2022 Trend Book. As 2 entities both committed to serving and advancing the missions of independent schools, NAIS and GG&A are closely aligned in our shared belief in the importance of collecting, analyzing, and making decisions based on data. If you don't know what DAZZLE means, I urge you to find out. DAZZLE, which is an acronym for Data and Analysis for School Leadership, is NAIS's annually collected storehouse of independent school data on everything from student enrollment and faculty compensation to financial operations and fundraising. Most of you are probably familiar with the annual submission of your school's data to NAIS. But at GG&A, we find that many of our school clients aren't fully utilizing their DAZZLE access. Did you know that you can log into the DAZZLE portal and understand how your school is doing year over year in relation to national trends and in comparison to a peer group that you create and save in the portal? If you aren't using DAZZLE, I urge you to do so. And our guest speakers from NAIS probably won't give you this advertisement, but I will, because I think it's so important. So let me step down from my soapbox and introduce our guest speakers. Taske joined NAIS in 2019 and has spearheaded dozens of targeted research projects, including NAIS's Snapshot Surveys and national polls on independent school topics, including philanthropy. Davis has conducted NAIS research about donors' decisions to give to independent schools and has presented his research at national conferences. Karla Taylor is a journalist by training and previously served as editor-in-chief of Case Currents magazine. For the past several years, Karla has edited and written books for NAIS, including The Handbook of Philanthropy, Psyching Up for the Phonathon, and A Trustee's Guide to Fundraising, with which I was proud to play a small role in helping Karla. Since 2016, Karla has also served as the co-editor of the NAIS Trend Book, which comes out annually. Thank you, Davis and Karla, for being here. Before I turn things over to Karla and Davis, a quick announcement. Although our guests will be sharing some views on trends in independent schools, and I have prepared some questions to ask them, if time permits, Davis and Karla are also open to answering some questions from the audience. If you would like to ask a question, please use the Q&A button on your Zoom menu. Accept our apologies in advance if we don't get to any questions or all of your questions, time depending on our half-hour webinar discussion. So now on with the discussion, and I'll call on Karla.
Thank you, Liz, and thanks to everyone who is joining us today. So in the 2021-2022 Trend Book that we just published, the chapter called The Philanthropy Outlook opened with this quotation. The big question facing fundraisers in 2020 was this: will the pandemic hurt fundraising results? For the majority of nonprofits, including independent schools, the answer was a reassuring no. So today we're going to tell you about 3 important trends, and most are reassuring, although there are some potential pitfalls for school fundraisers. The sources of our trends are primarily 2 things, and one is the trend book that I just mentioned, which was published in September, and the other is the just released data that came from Dazzle, which Liz was just talking about as well. This year we had 1,800 schools who took part in Dazzle, which is yet another reason why it is so rich and helpful to schools everywhere. So next, Davis is going to tell us about the trends that Dazzle saw in the annual fund capital campaigns.
Thank you, Karla. So overall, independent school fund annual funds had very favorable results for 2020 to 2021. And on this slide, you can see Dazzle data showed a 16% year-over-year increase to the median amount raised for annual funds. And this led to, in 2020, 2021, the median school raising just under $565,000. And so next we'll look into a few key groups and dive into this data a little bit more. So on this slide, you can see the average median gift size donated to annual funds by a few different donor groups. And so on the left, you see a year-over-year increase among all donors of 15%. And I also want to call out here that you can notice among current parents, there was a significant increase as well. And Karla will talk a little bit later about this and how we believe this is linked to how independent schools performed through the pandemic and how they were opened earlier in general than a lot of public schools. So as annual fund data looks very good, the capital campaign side was a little bit more mixed. And so according to Dazzle, the median amount raised for capital campaigns was down 8%. And we also know that fewer schools in general ran capital campaigns than the previous year. So just about 462 schools ran a capital campaign this most recent year, and that's compared to 530 the year before. And again, that's out of around 1,800. And just to note that, obviously not all schools run capital campaigns the same year. So this data also, you have to consider that some schools may have run a campaign in 2019, 2020, and not 2020, 2021. So just be mindful of that when looking at this data. And so you might look at this and be a little worried, but the silver lining is that capital campaigns are usually multi-year projects rather than annual funds. So something to consider. And also just remembering the context that Karla set at the top of the presentation. We at NAIS expected significant drops in fundraising when the pandemic hit. And in general, we haven't seen those drops. So that's good news overall. And, this does point to something you've probably heard many times, but just to be mindful and call it out again is think long and hard about how you're asking for money and what you're asking it for. Make sure that capital campaigns resonate with the context of your school and the context current parents and current students are in. But don't stop asking. That's something else we heard at the beginning of the pandemic is a lot of schools were questioning in March and April of 2020, should we even be asking for money at this time? And according to our findings in September 2020, in a snapshot survey, only 3% of schools stopped soliciting or limited who they solicited to. So now I'll turn it over to Karla and we'll look at some major trends and how supporters are giving to and supporting and engaging with their schools.
For a little bit of context for this next section, here's another quote from the Philanthropy Outlook in the Trend Book. Given all the events of the pandemic, it's now not surprising that more and more donors would want giving to be as easy as ordering groceries on their cell phones. It's also not at all surprising that advancement staffs would conceive of ways to blend the best of online and virtual engagement with in-person engagement. So as we'll see, it is possible that one of the most lasting trends to come out of the pandemic will be the way that so much has shifted online. So Davis is going to tell us more about that.
Yeah, so as you can see here, so just a note first that this data on this slide is not focused on independent schools exclusively. This is the only slide where that's the case. But this slide shows the percentage of total fund raised in K through 12 schools via online giving. And so in 2020, that was 13.5% of donations or of total funds, sorry. And that's a 26% increase over 2019. And what's more is that 28% of the funds given online were via mobile devices. So we'll talk a little bit more about, what this means and what you can do with this information. But first, we'll look to what we've learned from a snapshot survey. And so rather than just looking at how donations are made, the pandemic also shifted how events are put on. And so you can see here that a large majority of advancement professionals plan to hold events both online and in person in the future. So on the left, we have alumni events, in the middle, one-on-one major donor solicitation, and on the right, one-on-one major donor stewardship. And the pandemic taught us that, if done well, online events and virtual events can cost less and increase access to people around the world. And these lessons were certainly learned, and it looks like advancement staffs will continue to implement these solutions in the future. So now we'll look at our third member trend, which is who is doing the giving.
Well, I think all fundraisers know that major donors are absolutely vital to the success of fundraising, and that is certainly true for independent school advancement programs. Fortunately, many schools, the majority of schools reported that major donors continued to be generous even during 2020, and 2021. As this slide shows, 60% of respondents to a snapshot survey said that their major donors gave either slightly more or significantly more in 2020. And in fact, 26% said that they gave significantly more. So obviously that's very good news. Another sidelight on this is that Giving USA reported that planned giving was doing very well during that year. And in fact, bequests were up 10% in 2020. So that points to the ongoing importance of bequest programs and planned giving to maintaining major gifts. But this good news is accompanied by a potential problem, which is you have to be concerned that too much attention to major gifts means that you're not doing what you need to do to grow the pipeline of smaller and new donors who will be your donors of the future. If you place the vast majority on one group, are you neglecting the other? So here's a way to look at that. And that is Philanthropy Watchers spoke of the first year of the pandemic as a giving moment. In other words, a time when there was a case that was so compelling that it brought out shared community, and it also brought out deeply felt urgency about the need to give. For independent schools, this apparently was reflected in some very successfully targeted messaging, much of which had to do with an independent school's ability to keep the school open and running for the benefit of students. Needless to say, that was something that many givers found very compelling. And that targeted message no doubt helped avert fundraising disaster. But of course, moments, including giving moments, don't last forever. That's all there is to it. So for the coming year, that probably means two things. One is you have to continue to think about what is the relevant targeted message that you need to present for this year and next year to be equally compelling to your donors. And the second thing is you need to focus on donor retention, especially if you brought in new donors in last year. You need to make sure that both your record keeping and your campaigns and efforts do everything you can to retain those donors. It's a great truism that it is more productive and less expensive to retain the donors you have than to constantly chase new ones, even though new ones are important, of course. But this is certainly a year when donor retention efforts are very, very important. So it's one thing to be knowledgeable about what are the fundraising trends, but then it's another thing to know what to do with them. So here is a look at what the trends may mean for your to-do list.
Yeah, so we have just a few recommendations here, and I want to emphasize two in particular. And the first is, again, linked to the fact that more and more folks are going to your giving pages. So make sure that when they get to your website, that it's fast and convenient to donate, and examine everything from your landing page to page completion rates, and compare that experience on desktops, tablets, mobile devices, etc. And I'd also say, have folks review this that weren't on the design team, that aren't on the advancement team, bring in fresh eyes. And finally, review this every year. Set aside some time to check in on this and make sure that you're improving year after year. And the second is just simply to learn as much as you can about your donors and make sure you're understanding the context of your school. And one way to do that is to use Dazzle. As you've seen throughout this slideshow, there's a lot of data there. And it's even more useful when, as Liz was mentioning, you look at your school in particular and how it relates to peers. And the second thing I'd like to mention is the resource second from the left, and it's our NAIS Jobs to Be Done study. And I can speak more about that in questioning if folks are interested, but this is an innovative research methodology that we've been using for a few years now. And for donors, it's looking at the context and the outcomes they have when donating to your school. And by understanding that context and what they're looking for, hopefully, we hope that you can better market to them so that you can keep them, get higher donation rates and retain them in the future. And I'll hand it over to Karla for just to talk through just a few other NAIS resources.
We have a book program at NAIS that offers a number of resources that you may find useful. The Handbook of Philanthropy, the book that's the second from the right, is like a short course in best practices in everything from putting your staff together in a productive way to working well with trustees and your head of school, to just all kinds of nuts and bolts about the annual giving, marketing, all sorts of other things. In addition to that, the third from the left is our Plan Giving Primer. And if you go to NAIS.org and put Planned Giving in the search box, it will take you directly to this. This is a free resource that tells you everything from why you should set up planned giving to how to go after specific types of gifts, beginning with bequests, since even if you don't have the staff or the resources to do more sophisticated planned gifts, almost all schools can benefit from having bequests. And again, the Planned Giving Primer is free. You can just download it whenever you want. In addition, we have as well some training guides on the far right. is the Trustee's Guide for Fundraising that Liz indeed was a contributor to, a generous contributor. And that's a little booklet that you can hand out to your trustees to explain to them what their role is in both getting and giving gifts. In addition to that, on NAIS.org, we have a variety of kinds of other free resources that are sure to be helpful, and obviously they're available 24/7 whenever you need them. So, and then the trend book as well will give you overall views of how things are going in the world of independent school fundraising. It really is a unique resource from that perspective. So whatever trends we may encounter in yet another unpredictable year, we very much hope that at the NAIS website and with resources like these, you can find tools that will help you keep up the great fundraising work that we've seen despite these difficult circumstances. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Karla and Davis, for that overview. And we still have some time for some questions. I see that a couple have been asked in the Q&A button, and we invite others to be asked in the Q&A button. Just a couple from me. So in the Philanthropy Outlook chapter, you cite the efficacy, particularly in the early going in the pandemic, of targeted messages. You know, the school needs more financial aid support because we have students and families who are clamoring for that support now that their personal circumstances have changed. There were some schools that were very effective in articulating messages around the safety during the height of the pandemic, although I could say we're in the height of the pandemic all over again, of, you know, having the right tools, having the right technology for virtual learning, et cetera. So my question is about when those messages cease to be relevant. We hope that the pandemic comes to an end. What are the pitfalls for fundraisers and schools who have hung a lot of their messaging on those sort of urgent and very, very clear needs? What do we need to watch for as we pivot to a post-pandemic environment, and how we're articulating our case for support?
Well, the answer is that nothing is forever, and that in messaging, as well as any other aspect of running a school, you constantly have to be attentive to how the situation is changing around you, both in the world in general, in the independent school world, but especially in your own school. You really need to be attentive. I think probably an early warning signal is always how the response to your appeals is. And if you have a good system set up so that you can instantly see what people are responding to and what they aren't, then you just need to be able to pivot very quickly so that you can change as the needs do. As the Philanthropy Watchers say, a giving moment won't last forever. I think it has to be an enduring part of fundraising planning, that you constantly are creating new messages that you can have in your pipeline so that you can change as the case does over the years.
Great. Davis, I'm gonna put you on the spot. We have an interesting question in the Q&A about the online giving breakout, and whether the online giving and mobile giving breaks out along age lines, whether it is, as we might suspect, more younger alumni giving in that manner. Do you have data on that? Are you able to share it off the top of your head?
So we don't have data specific to independent schools, but yes, I mean, we do know that younger generations in general tend to give to nonprofits more online than older generations. However, I would also venture to say that the pandemic may have shifted that. You know, I think everyone was learning how to do things online and going online for more and more aspects of their life. But nonetheless, regardless of the fact, it's certainly a truth that younger generations are looking for options online. And I think that's the importance of making sure you're creating young alumni networks and reaching out to them regularly.
Sure.
Well, and along those same lines, I think any of us from our personal experience, if we are older and if we have entered the stage of life where unfortunately we may be wanting to be giving memorial gifts, I think that one of the big eye openers for me, even as we were working on that part of the trend book, is how many times I want to make a memorial gift for someone. And I get to the organization's website, I get halfway through, and it doesn't work. There's something wrong. So I think that it is just another reminder that life has gone online. That is all there is to it. And we have to make sure that we're capable of receiving gifts any way that donors want to give them.
Yes, absolutely. Tell me a little bit about, you close your chapter in the Philanthropy Outlook chapter by asking what you say is the big question about pivoting to keep donors' interest high and to sustain or increase their level of giving. And you talked in this webinar about the importance of retaining the donors that you captured, that schools captured during the pandemic, because as we all know, it is much more efficient to retain the donors you have than to go out and capture new ones. Do you have advice for our listeners about how to keep donors' interest high, sustain their engagement with your school, and sustain or even upgrade their gifts?
Well, I think as Davis pointed out earlier, it would be very worthwhile to go to the NAIS website and look up the jobs to be done research. It classifies donors into, is it 3 categories or 4, Davis?
3.
Into 3 categories. And it is very eye-opening to look at that and think about how you need to be attentive to what you hear people telling you, that if you aren't really listening, you're not going to be able to appeal to them in the way that means the most to them. Again, there is just no substitute, as every good fundraiser knows, for listening, for truly listening and staying on top of what both your response to your campaigns and your donors themselves say. What thoughts do you have on that front, Liz?
Well, I would agree. I think the good stewardship practices that sometimes fall to the wayside because we're so intent on capturing donors, capturing the next gift, not to mention staffing reunion weekend and all the other things that advancement professionals do under the other duties to be assigned caveat. I think we often neglect stewardship and meaningful stewardship. I mean, we tend to be good in schools at the sort of the basics of sending the acknowledgement, ensuring that it's accurate, doing it relatively quickly, sending the annual stewardship reports to our endowed fund donors. But I think true meaningful stewardship is what motivates donors to understand the impact they've made at your school, and also motivates them to continue and even upgrade their giving. And I think that it takes time, and it really, you have to dedicate energy to that focus. Few of the schools that we work with have a dedicated donor relations or stewardship staff member. And I think it's always sort of the first thing to be cut or the last thing to be added. And I wish that were different.
And can I just add in there, I think this is an opportunity again, where going more virtual might help with this,
Yes.
Enlist your head of school to have a 15-minute virtual chat with someone. There's ways to go about it that are very meaningful, that you can spread the wealth a little bit and share some of the work with other colleagues.
Absolutely. And I think your data on the fact that more schools were doing major gifts work, both asking for gifts from major donors and stewarding and cultivating major donors virtually, speaks to that ability, right? I mean, that's a silver lining of the pandemic, that we've gotten more comfortable with doing things online. Our donors have gotten more comfortable. And I think that there's good rationale for continuing that kind of work. I don't think in-person work, what I like to call sofa sitting, will ever not have a place in fundraising, and particularly major gift fundraising. But I think we're more comfortable now than we ever were with the virtual. There is a question in the Q&A sort of aimed at me, and I will answer it. How have we seen major giving programs and strategies change over time inside or outside of a campaign? And I would say that, and the reason I'm calling out that question is because the nice springboard from our just now topic, the major giving programs in independent schools are becoming increasingly important. I think the pyramid writ large is narrowing. In philanthropy in general, we're seeing more money come from the major donors, and the schools that are dedicating themselves to establishing, nurturing, and really following through with major gift programs and strategies are those that are raising the most money. There's no question. Also, I think it's always important, again, data. It's important to align your major gift program and strategy with your prospect pool. So it's important to understand what your prospect pool really looks like, how many capable donors you have in it, and then ensuring that you have adequate numbers of major gift officers or those who are frontline fundraisers in your program in order to reach those donors and those prospects. If they don't feel paid attention to, yet they have lots of capability, they're unlikely to make their best gift to your school. So it's important to focus on that. One of the other things I was going to ask you, if we're at 32 past, but one more question and then we'll wrap. Just tell me a little bit about sort of the online, and we had a question in the Q&A, the online mobile giving. What makes for a good mobile experience, do you think? I mean, Karla, you were talking about going to a website, not being able to include an institution in your legacy planning, but I mean, what are the key elements, do you think? What makes a donor want to give online or want to go back to a website to give online?
Well, I think the answer is the same no matter what your motive is for going online or to mobile giving. And that is, for heaven's sake, don't put roadblocks in the way of what it is that people want to actually do.
Right.
I understand the idea of making an account or registering as a donor or anything like that. But for heaven's sake, if what they really want to do is give you money, then look at it from the standpoint of how can I allow this person to give me money as quickly and easily as possible. I think that's so much of it is just make it easy.
Yes. Make it easy, make it fast. I made a bunch of year-end gifts, and I know that there were some websites where it was very easy to find how to do that, where to do that, and others where it was not so easy. So we did have one more question in the Q&A that I just want to address quickly, and that was about some of you may not have a login to Dazzle, may not be NAIS members, and where might you find information about Dazzle? On NAIS's website, it's a page that I actually visit frequently, is a facts at a glance, NAIS Independent School Facts at a Glance, and it gives, there are PDFs for each of the past several years on that page for the Dazzle, the sort of high level Dazzle stats. So that's a great page to find on NAIS's website, and it will give you a sense of where your school sort of stacks up against some peer schools. So I want to thank our guest speakers and thank you very much for all of you who came today and were here today. I welcome everybody staying in touch with us and getting in touch with us. Please do know that, oh, sorry, I want to share my screen here. Please do know that GG&A has regular webinars that you can find out about on our webpage, but also on if you follow us on LinkedIn or connect with me on LinkedIn. I think it's also important to mention again our independent schools practice at GG&A. This is a sector of nonprofits that we are dedicated to serving in partnership with organizations like NAIS. And very much want to connect with independent school fundraisers and help you do your job well. So thank you everybody for joining us, and have a great rest of your week. Stay warm for those who are in cold climates. Thank you, Davis and Karla.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye everyone.